This is CTO Insights, a podcast on engineering leadership. I'm Katerina, your host, and I will be bringing you insights from senior engineering leaders and experts on creating a culture of high performance.
Today, my guest is Anne-Laure Huin. Anne-Laure is a VP of Engineering at Mollie, a platform for businesses to get paid and manage their money, making payments, reconciliation, reporting, fraud prevention, and financing simple for companies of all sizes. Prior to Mollie, Anne-Laure held a senior engineering manager role at Uber. She comes with a lot of insights on building high-performing teams. In our conversation, we dive into the challenges of scaling teams and hiring new talent in a changing economic environment. Anne-Laure emphasizes the importance of balancing team seniority and investing in internal growth. She shares valuable insights on evaluating candidates for cultural fit, setting them up for success, as well as strategies for building high-performing teams and aligning them with business goals. We also talk about metrics and KPIs, how important it is to keep the context in mind when evaluating performance metrics and to use them as a guide on improving the overall teamwork instead of targets for individual performance. It's a very insightful conversation, and I hope you enjoy it.
This episode is brought to you by Adiva, a global talent network that I founded back in 2014 that connects the world's best companies with the world's best tech talent. At Adiva, we provide access to a global network of top-tier tech and product talent ready to hit the ground running. With the ability to introduce a candidate within 24 hours and an exceptional 98% success rate on trial engagements, Adiva offers the flexibility for companies to scale their teams up or down as needed. If you're looking to expand your team, drive momentum in new projects, or need to backfill a role, Adiva might just be the solution you need. Visit adivait.com to get started. Anne-Laure, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here today, and thank you for accepting my invite. Let's kick it off with a quick introduction from yourself, and then we can dive into the conversation.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me over. My name is Anne-Laure Huin. I'm currently VP Engineering at Mollie, but I've been actually in the tech industry for, over 20 years in quite a number of different roles. I started as a software engineer, and then, I went into management, starting doing, direct management, and then slowly but surely, enjoying, more the organization strategy and more the vision and the technical, leadership side of things, and starting, growing, in my own role, in my own career, and, looking over, a number of, teams and organization. Over the last, I've been at Mollie for over 2 years. And before Mollie, I spent close to a little bit over 4 years at Uber in Amsterdam, where I was heading some of their payment experiences teams. And at Mollie, I'm VP Engineering, currently leading the payments domain. So the team within Mollie that is overlooking our payment, processing platform, but as well, enabling, Mollie's merchants and customers, to make, payment and have, variety of payment methods. So looking at the conversions, looking at enabling this, for Mollie's backbone.
Great, thanks. When we were chatting a bit before the podcast, we talked about your previous role at Uber and what it meant in terms of scaling teams, high demand for hiring new talent, and then joining Mollie, it was that transitional period, which is we're still in that period technically in the industry where there are hiring freezes, things are uncertain, so companies are not scaling as fast as they used to. And you can closely compare to different scenarios because it's been recent. I want to go through the different stages of growth at companies and what it means for the team, and also delivering, because you still want to deliver, you still want to continue to create new features and create value for customers, basically. How different is it now that you are unable to hire as easily as you would, let's say, 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, indeed. It is a very different economic environment right now, but as well a different, maturity of the company. When I joined Molly, again, 2 years ago, we were, really in this expansion phase where we were really hiring a lot of engineers. When I joined, we had maybe, I think, 20 engineers with the domain. Now we are over 70 people with, various cross-functional roles. So really, you can see, that growth. And, there's different phase, right? The rapidly growth, phase is how do you onboard? How do you integrate? How do you make, all those people having, a positive experience about the company, but as well, starting, providing impact and value, for what we're trying to build, right? So you're really into how do you optimize every single, process from onboarding, from, permissions and, even from an organization strategies, like how do you continue, to build up. But over the last year or so, it's more about how do you stabilize, right? How do you retain the people that you have, right? How do you help them grow themselves, right? So, you can really build on the talent that you already have and then, focus on, okay, where are the gaps, right? They will, attrition is still, something, and I think it is natural. People are, still, changing, jobs. They're sometimes moving countries. So we are still, hiring. There is as well, we're lucky enough that at least at Molly, we're still investing and we're still growing, not as fast as before, but there's strategic area like for instance, our in-person payment area where we're still investing and we're still, growing, those teams. But we're a little bit more careful on who do we bring, right? Making sure that we're focusing on not just the technical skills, but as well, the fit within, the rest of, the Molly, values. At least, that's the way, they call it at Molly, and how we, really pair up with the existing talents that we have. So I think it is really, two different things because in a very rapid growth environment. And I also, faced that at Uber because I joined in 2017, which was as well, when we were really, really, really investing and building. You're really looking at, streamlining. So you're focusing a lot on the skill set. Whereas when you're trying to mature, when you're trying to build high performing teams and you don't have as well much, ability to really, continue, to just, like throw, people at, solving the problem. You're looking towards more, quality and, investing in your own people is a really nice way to, continue, to have that internal growth, right? One a good example for me is at the moment, we're focusing a little bit more on junior hiring. So graduate, interns, because that is a nice way as well to continue to grow and invest while as well, training those, junior and leveraging our, current, population of employees that, gain, quite a lot of experience and expertise over the last, couple of years.
Yeah. And in terms of the strategic development and plans for new releases, new features, how has this changed in that regard? Now that you're not throwing, as you say, more people at the problem. Do you have a changed way of defining the problem or deciding what problem is worth working on now that the resources are more limited?
Of course. And I think that is not necessarily, I think that's always been, something that is important to look at, right? Is where do you invest, right? And that investment is not just money. It's as well, people, time and energy. What is the biggest return on investment? What is the biggest impact that you want to get? So, for me, it is working very closely with the rest of our leadership team, right? With our product leadership team particularly, but as well, our commerce organization, our partnership organization, and really understanding what are, the key must, things we want to deliver because it's going to help the company grow. It's going to help, our merchant and our, customers as well, to be, successful, right? So it is as well making choices, right? At the end of the day, it is about, looking at, okay, there's only so many things we can do. How does that investment look like? And particularly in companies like Mollie that's been around for like 20 years, we do have, a fair amount of technical debt, like any, companies that have been around, a little bit, longer. Is how do you invest? How do you not just, build something new, but as well make sure that you invest into reliability, into making sure that, operational, health is there and healthy and not, causing, trouble. Looking at, maintainability. So how do you, making those, small compromise, I think is something really key. And that means, not just working in isolation. That means, working together and making sure that, as a leadership team, we are strong, and then we understand where do we want to invest. And it's not just, oh, we're just going, to, build this massive refactoring for 6 months and not deliver any business value, or, oh, we're just going to add, more features without necessarily, thinking about the impact, because the answer is somewhere in the middle. But I think what is really key, at least in my experience, and what I'm really, really, pushing is, there's only so many things you can do. And having a single roadmap that is, really, visible for everyone, both, from, the engineers that will need to actually, deliver that roadmap, but as well, towards your internal and external, stakeholders is super important, because that is really how you communicate what you're going, to do. And then, making sure that you're not, overcommitting or under delivering either.
I'd like to dig into this further a bit later, especially around the collaboration with product and also deciding how much effort you put into things like refactoring, maintainability, developer experience versus new feature development. Now let's go a bit back to the moment of evaluating, as you said, people for the Mollie values. How did you put it? Like the culture of it, yes, and making sure that you hire people that are actually in line with the vision of the company, that would stay perhaps for the longer term, so that you don't lose in that process of training and then churning employees. And then also in terms of training the juniors, that's an interesting take. I'd like to dig further into that part. So first, evaluation. What's the process? How do you put that in place?
So I wouldn't say it's necessarily, an evaluation, but part of our interview process is, there's, different steps, right? And of course, and I'm going to talk about, engineers, because this is what I know, the most, right? Or engineering managers for that matter is, very similar. We do have a set of technical interviews that are really, meant to look at, the technical skills, right? Design or coding, or, like the ability, to understand, a problem, right? But we always have, as part of our interview process, something we call, the Mollie values, which is basically more, a conversation that is looking at the experience of the candidates and what they are looking, when seeking for a new job, right? The way, they like interacting with product, their experience in, mentoring. And we actually have, a pretty, well-defined interview template with like a number of questions. We're looking at, okay, what are the key things? And it's as much, deciding if it's a fit for us than it is for the candidate, because it is the one interview where it's a little bit more, free flow, and really, understanding what they're looking at, for their new opportunity, and making sure that it is matching, right? I always tell candidates that Mollie is a very, interesting company, as we are asking our engineers to help us solve problems and challenges, right? And we're not just necessarily asking them, to implement just a solution, right? And I think this is as well, many companies are approaching this in a different way. But how do you make sure that there is, that, match that actually, the people joining will be, happy to join, right? As much as, will they, join, and find, the support that they need for mentoring, for growth, and all those things. So it's not necessarily, something that is really, rocket science. It's more a conversation. That's some, engineering managers, some product managers, some people that have a little bit more, experience. And that's a very nice way. And even for me, I actually went through that when I was a candidate and I was interviewing over 2 years ago now. And it was, I think, for me, one of the best conversation, because I got as much out of that conversation that I think, the interviewers, did.
Yeah. And when it comes to hiring for roles that you mentioned, engineering managers, do you tend to hire externally or promote from within?
Both, and it very much depends on the situation. At Mollie, we really value, like growing people internally. So if we, if there is a fit, if there is interest, we will, as much as possible, try, to help, those individuals, grow. But we also strongly believe, and I strongly believe, in setting up, people for success, right? For instance, if it's, if it's an engineer that wants to move to management, right? And it is a team that is really in trouble, that has a lot of pressure, that's not necessarily, would be, the best fit for that person to move into management. But then me as a, manager within, the community, I am always, committing to help them grow and give them, maybe not, that opportunity, but look at, would they be a better fit, for a future one, right? So yes, we're looking internally. Sometimes it's just not a match, and then we have to go externally. More and more recently, indeed, we're relying on our internal talents, particularly because we're at a size now where it's nice to have internal mobility and give, people that have been there for like a year or 2 years, the ability just, to do something slightly different, which I think is something, really powerful, to, foster that internal mobility, and give, those, people, that chance to learn and do, things, differently, without necessarily, leaving, Mollie and then, going, through another job. But I would say, indeed, what I'm noticing over the last, few months is we are first, always, having a look internally, rather than just, relying on our, like pool of candidates or current, like pipeline of candidates.
Right.
So that is definitely a trend that I can see more this year than maybe, the previous years. It's partly linked to the fact that in the past, at least for Mollie or for Uber, we always had, a strong pipeline of candidates. So if you have a strong pipeline, then, it's easier, to continue, to get, those, candidates converting into, new employees. If you have to start something from scratch, then you really want to be able, to understand, okay, what do I need? And do I not have those talents, internally, first? So very much a combination.
What I've seen with a lot of companies is tending to promote their best individual contributor, their best developer into an engineering manager or a team lead role. And oftentimes the expectations are not set properly. So this person is kind of trying to keep their old responsibilities, but also take the new ones. It's causing burnout. It's causing stress for people, setting expectations, and basically evaluating if the person is a good fit for a managerial role, because that's usually sets apart the development part and the hands-on work.
So for me, those are two different career tracks, right? Someone, very, senior doesn't have to move to management to, feel that they can continue to evolve in a, in the context of a company, right? And it is true at Mollie, it's true at, it was true at Uber, it was true at Irdeto as well, right? Which was, my, previous company. And many companies now acknowledge that these are, two different tracks. You have an IC, individual contributor track, where, you can really, grow through a variety of roles, including, some very senior ones, right? Staff, senior staff, principal, there's different names for them, but that, shows, that evolution. And then you have the management track, right? Which is a completely different one. And I always tell, people that, moving to management, you really need to understand that it is a different job, right? Your day-to-day activities will be different. Your responsibilities will be, different. Yes, it's important as an engineering manager to have, strong technical and engineering background, because, you're part of those, discussions. You still have, pretty important technical responsibility and role, but it is not the same as, being, a senior engineer or a technical lead, right? Because on top of that, you have to really, understand that one of your primary responsibility is people management and growing people around you, right? Giving them feedback, making sure that everybody, like building a high performing team is, one of the primary responsibility of, an engineering manager. Acknowledging there are two tracks, showing the opportunity, in each of those tracks, I think is important. And then once, someone comes to me and say, yeah, I understand that, I still think management is something where I can see myself growing into, then it is coming back to how do I, set them up for success? How do I give them some opportunities, right? And it can be delegation at first. I usually say, hey, why don't you try mentoring others? You don't have to have a direct report to really, start, at mentoring, and see how you feel about that, right? See how you feel about, helping someone else, grow and sharing your experience and expertise, right? And then, of course, if there is an opportunity, like making sure that we help them through that transition. I'm a huge proponent of what I call, apprentice manager, right? Which is, how do you set a framework where those people, can be successful, right? So teaching them, okay, one-on-ones, how often do you have them? What kind of discussion do you have? Do you discuss project? Well, maybe not. Maybe, you should, leave the project discussion to like the stand up and the team, kind of ceremonies, right? How to approach difficult conversations. How do you, make sure that you deliver, that feedback? How do you as well, play a technical role through enabling others, not necessarily, by doing, things, on your own, because that's usually the biggest challenge that, like very strong, engineers have, is like once they move to management, they want to do exactly the same role. They want to be able, to tell everybody else, okay, this is the way we design. And sometimes it's needed, but sometimes it's actually, even more powerful to become a multiplier and really enable, those people around, right? And for that, the key is indeed getting the support, right, in terms of, training, but as well, getting, strong support, from and mentoring from your own, leadership team. And that is something that I, feel very strongly about. That's been my philosophy, my principles, for many, many years. And yeah, I have, quite, a lot of, success story, but as well, it's important as well to give sometimes, like, a way, to reflect, right? Because it's important to support those, people that wants to move to management. But I always say, you know what, we're going, to give it, 6 months. We're going to really, understand how you're doing, how you like it, because sometimes people are like, you know what, actually, management is not for me. I was way happier being an individual contributor. And that doesn't mean failing. That means making a conscious choice about how, what do you like to it, what gives you that positive energy every day of, doing, your job. So, yeah, I like this model of, support, coaching, mentoring, regular check-ins. And then, of course, a check-in on like, okay, are you happy? Is that the role that, you thought, it was? And of course, feedback, right? Because sometimes, some people are just not a right fit for a manager.
It's being the multiplier. That's a very nice way to frame it, because that's the main thing, really, whether you enable others to succeed and to support them and grow through their growth, or you want to do it yourself. If you want to do it yourself, you mentioned the junior developers and your new hiring efforts in that regard. How do you balance the team in terms of uh, what does the team structure look like? How do you balance the seniority within the team?
Balance is really the key word here. It is about making sure that if you only have a team of, very senior engineer, they will typically, achieve, a lot, but they will be limited, right? Both in their own, personal growth, but as well, in, what they can achieve. So I'm also, one of the principle I'm trying and aiming at is to have, a ratio of, 3-1, right? Like one, key senior and at least, three other, type of engineers. And that can run from junior to a little bit more, mid, experienced, engineers. So because that helps, finding that balance, because everybody will grow, right? Your N1s will grow into, N2s, N2 to senior wants to grow to staff. So that also, help, that balance. Senior tend to be, better at, driving more complex problems. But it is important as well, for them to, delegate. So yeah, finding that balance, for me is key. And whenever possible, yeah, I try to have, I think for me, it's a good ratio. It's not always the case. Sometimes teams will be very complex and they will require very unique skill set and competencies that you really, cannot find with, outside, very, very senior, engineers, but this is more the exception. And for me, even, in those aspects, I try, to add, more, junior people, because it's such a nice way, for people to get, different kind of experiences and join, companies and, like join a team and just, learn, so much.
And how do you set the juniors for success in the day to day? Do you have any documentation of best practices, guidelines?
Yeah, so it's personally, I always make sure that there is a plan in place, right? That there is a strong onboarding plan, that the team selected maybe, what we call sometimes an onboarding buddy. So just, someone that, help, the new, joiner, going, through, the first, few weeks. But for junior, it's even more important to make sure, to have that proactive support, because sometimes I think when, you're starting, and again, it's not very, true for everyone, but junior tends to not ask for help proactively, right? Because they see this as like, oh, I want to solve it myself. I want to unblock myself. And, giving them that opportunity, that regular, touch, is important. I'm also very lucky that at Mollie, we actually have a number of, processes or onboarding things that are, tailored towards, that journey too. So that's something that we don't have to reinvent for every single team or every single manager, right? So to give you an example, every new joiner start with a more, broader onboarding, journey. So, they get to understand a little bit what the company is doing. They get to understand at a higher level some of the key, domain and functions. And then they really start within the team. And when they start within the team, they start with, their buddy. And their buddy helps them, making sure that, all right, how do I set up my development environment, right? How, can I become, productive so I can, make, my first, merge request within, my first week, right? So those are more, tactical. Right. So the details will vary per team, but very much the framework to operate and to integrate and to support is there. Plus, for me, I don't necessarily manage team directly anymore, right? I manage managers because I'm operating more at a higher level. So how me as a domain lead can I coach my own engineering managers so themselves they can play that role towards, the new, comers and the new joiners, making sure that we give the, everyone the right type of challenge, right? We start small, right? And it can be, oh, it's a user story or a task, right? And said, okay, try to implement that. And then, like making it a little bit more complex every time. And, like trying, to stretch that and then see how people reacting, right? What are the things that they're, what are the strengths? What are their weaknesses? And then how do we help them? Sometimes it is as well, particularly for junior, it's like, oh, maybe they need a little bit more, training or coding, help. So what kind of, internal training can we do? how can we pair them up to do maybe, pair programming, right? So we really try to have that tailored experience. And the engineering managers, because they are the first line, they're usually the ones that are better equipped to help, the junior, and as those regular one-on-one check in with them, give them feedback how they're doing. That's what helped them, progress, the most. And again, building a high performing team is not building, a team of just, like many individuals. It's really building a team that's cohesive and that can work together.
That's the next thing I wanted to talk about. We mentioned building high performing teams, high performance in general within the team. So, what are some other strategies that you have in place around this, and also the general structure of the teams for day-to-day work, and how are they aligned with the overall business goals?
Yeah, high performing team seems to be the hype word recently, right? Where we're trying to do more with, fewer people, or so. There's not, I would love to be able to say, hey, there's a magic recipe, and if you do this, then this is, a really, the holy grail. Then you will get, a lot of, impact. I think for me, it comes to really building a team and understanding the strengths of everyone in the team, making sure that they work together, right? Making sure that they understand the goal of the team. What are they, what is the problem that they're solving, right? Again, to come back to, what I was saying when at Mollie, and that's also something that I really, feel quite strongly about. We're not, just, implementing technical solutions. We're solving problems. We're solving challenges. So really, trying to encourage teams and, engineers, individuals, everybody, to have that mindset and, like look at it like, what can I do that will really, enable that impact is really, key part of, building that high performing team. So it's a mindset, it's a culture, it's getting, the team together on what is the best way for the team to operate. Post COVID, I can see that different teams have different ways, right? And naturally, I can see certain teams that tend to be, they want to be co-located. They feel stronger being, together in the office on a very regular basis, right? And naturally, I can see those teams, kind of, coming, together. And for them, that's what it means. They feel more performant when they're all together in, the office for a certain, amount of time, right? But I also see some teams that are actually, much more hybrid, where they're like, okay, we are, going to work mostly, remotely, and then we're going to come together. And when we come together, this is really, for like knowledge sharing, brainstorming, like discussion on, very specific, topics. So they're much more, and that's their way of, being high performers, right? It is to be able, to find, what is really, the way that works the best for the teams. But like, it's interesting to see, those things emerging. And yeah, it is something that is very new. That is something that I've seen really, kind of, going through over the last, couple of years.
You mentioned people being hybrid in the office. Do you have people working fully remotely? And also, in addition to that, working with external contractors on specific projects, for example? Or...
So, no. For actually, one good reason is it's a company as well, culture and value that we want to be able, to meet on a regular basis, right? Mollie is a company that is hybrid. We have as well, engineering offices in various locations, right? So we have Amsterdam, which is the main, urban center. And then we have as well, a hub in Lisbon and then one in Milan, right? So the nature of this means that, yes, we have to work, with various people, remotely, at times, right? But we are trying to, say, hey, it's important for us to meet on a regular basis, and it doesn't have to be every day, right? It very much depends on the teams. Some teams, most of the teams will have a team day where they're trying to be together co-located and, use, that day for, what I was saying, right? Brainstorming, retrospective, things, like that. And, like they're trying, to meet in the office. Of course, we're flexible, right? Because life is, happening to all of us, right? We all have, our private, life and families. And sometimes it's not always possible, to be there. But we're really, trying, to encourage, people and like make it, like, okay, when we go to the office, this is really, to be together, not just to be, like in a small, meeting room or, a conference booth, for the entire day. So we are really hybrid and not necessarily, enforcing a number of days, but it is important for us to be able, to meet on a regular basis. And when it comes to your other questions around contractors, we used to have a lot of contractors working, with us for many, many years. About 2 years ago, and that was as well, part of the reason why we grew so much, is we made the choice to no longer, go external and work with contractors, at least from a general standpoint, and instead hire full-time employees. Right? So we converted a lot of the contractors that were working with us over 2 years ago, to full-time employees. Actually, a few of them join us and are still with us, to this day. Which was, really, awesome, to see. But that is a choice. Of course, this sometimes, can be exceptions, but more generally, we are trying to really, like resource everything internally.
And when we speak about communicating, you mentioned different hubs. People are often working from other locations that is not the office. Do you resolve to meetings, or do you have more asynchronous communication in the day-to-day?
Both. I think we all had to learn it the hard way that it is important to communicate and over communicate, right? So we are using Slack as a very, primary source of communication. Email a little bit, but I have to say it's getting, less and less. I think Slack is definitely, the primary source of, message those days. And then, of course, meetings, right? So engineering team have their normal engineering ceremonies, right? Typically, adapted from agile methodologies. So, stand up, retrospective, planning, refinement, and all those, great things. We do have to align, on a regular basis with meetings. So that's the best way, for us to do that. And of course, one-on-ones. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. It's interesting that the communication now, is flowing, right? And it might not have a meeting, but like if two engineers are having a chat and they are not, co-located, then like, oh, just, up on this, Google meeting, and then, let's just, discuss. So it is very natural and very fluid, but communication needs to be intentional because it's not maybe as easy as maybe, 5 years ago when everybody was in the office and it was easy, to, just, have a chat at the coffee machine, right? Nowadays, you really need, to communicate and over communicate, particularly for me as a leader, making sure that, what are the, sometimes you can be overloaded by that communication, right? Because everybody try to over communicate. So, what is relevant, what is really, the things that, people need to take action is, I think, sometimes some of the challenge.
Yeah. We talked a bit at the beginning about the prioritization of work, whether it's feature development or maybe technical debt, just also around the developer experience, because when we talk about being high performant or doing more with less people on board, we need to make sure that, from developer perspective, the code is maintainable, it can easily scale, it can easily be changed with new functionality and so on. When it comes to a company that's on the market for so long, there are definitely areas where this might be difficult. How do you approach this in terms of prioritizing, whether it's dedicated time during every sprint or other arrangements?
Yeah. So I think again, there's different aspects, right? There is more like a company strategy that is important, because it's not just, what do we want to do now, but where do we see ourselves, in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, right? Because at the end of the day, your engineering strategy will need, to make sure that we can accommodate, for that, right? The best example for me to illustrate that is like, okay, Mollie wants to continue to grow. We want to continue to grow to new countries, to expand our offering. And then that means that, we need to be able to be competitive in every single market with every single local payment method, right? So if we look at that, then we actually went through that exercise last year, and we're like, all right, if we want to be competitive, if we want to go to those markets within the next, 2 to 3 years to 5 years, then that means we need to start integrating another, 35 payment methods. All right. We know our speed right now was like maybe, 3 per year, 2 to 3 per year. How do we do that? Okay. Well, then you can, start, having those conversations. All right. Then now suddenly we need to completely increase our speed. We need to go and deliver, 15 per year, or, maybe, 30 in the next, 18 months. How do we achieve that? Right. So that's why it's important to understand what's not just, the company doing right now, but what do we want to do for the future? Because those investments are very much, needed, right? And then you can look at, okay, how do I continue to enable the business? Because it's important, particularly nowadays where the economic situation is sometimes a little bit more tricky, to have, that incremental approach, and always, put the merchant, always put the customers, first, always, try, to do, the best, by them, because that's as well, philosophy within the company, right? But how do you do that in a way that gives you, one step closer to where we want to be? Because, it's also okay sometimes to go, a little bit, slower, right now, because, they're going to be, return on investment in the future. Or the other way around, like making a conscious choice. You know what? There's such a great opportunity. We want to be able to support that feature. We know that we need to do a little bit more work, after that, but let's first enable it. And then, let's continue and iterate. So for me, the key thing is iterate, be conscious about the choices that you're making, right? It's also okay to not fix all your technical debt, as long as you know exactly where do you want to go, and then, how fast do you need to be there, right? So having a technical vision, a technical North Star is important, because that helps you to know, okay, how do I support my company and the business and everything, how and where, what does it mean from a technical perspective? And then, it's looking at how do I get there? And of course, it's an art more than a science, I think, because there's always, going to be choices to be made, right? Because we are never being able, to address everything. But, there's some, principles that you can use, right? For instance, payments domain from an engineering perspective. So reliability comes first, right? Because it doesn't matter, as many shiny new features I'm delivering, if the core of our payment processing and transaction, processing is not working to the way, it should, then, that is definitely something that, should go first. So anything around reliability, anything around, operational, health is, super important, because that's also, return on investment. Then you can look at, working closely with product, right? Because they are, the one that typically, are even closer to our, customers and merchants. Commerce, so sales, partnership, really understanding the business to help, making, empower my managers and empower, each of the team to make those decisions by themselves, right? To find what is the right trade-off, but to make sure as well they use data, right? So they can, let's say, you mentioned developer experience, right? Making sure that the maintainability of a code, or that the developer experience, is, everything that we invest there, can be quantified as, a return on investment of, like, okay, if we do this work, then, we can be, twice as fast for the next payment method that we're going to implement, right? Those are very, tangible examples. But that's usually, what we look at. And then really having, that open conversation and making sure that we collectively, make sure there's one roadmap and that it is, very clear.
You also mentioned the collaboration with product. How do you have that structured?
Yeah. So at Mollie, we just went through some change, trying to empower each domain to be a little bit more accountable and responsible, end to end, right? And that, it for engineering and for, payments, it didn't necessarily, was a big change. But I think in the mindset for some other people, this is something that was, a little bit more of a change. But really what it means is understanding what is the mission and the vision of, the domain, the area that, you're, looking at. And then, really having a leadership team that is, people that have, based on their skill set, based on the experience, bring, this to that leadership. So for instance, within payments, or leadership team, is, product, it is partnership, it is data, it is, engineering, it is as well, some people, coming, as well, and helping on the commerce, side of things, like all the people you need to be able, to make informed choices that then, will drive what the domain will do. And then, will, help, leading, the company to the next step, right? So it's not just about product. It's not just about engineering. It is really about, understanding what are you set up to do, right? So again, different, domain or different area will have, different needs. In my case, again, payments is very, focused on making money, management effortless, right? So it's new integrations, it's easier integration, it's better, unified, checkout, experience. So how do we translate that, right? And then that is really, working, together and having a unified, voice, because that is the way to really make sure that, we're all aligned and we all, make sure that we are, in agreement. So it does require communication. I think communication, open communication, trust, collaboration is really key. And making sure that, everybody, understand, the different, perspective.
Talking about communication, do you have any specific way of cascading down the like bigger goals, the vision? Because oftentimes the teams are not fully aware of why they're working on what they're working, and it can become frustrating if you only focus on the task
Yeah.
or the story. Just to make sure everyone is aligned.
Oh, I think we can always do better. I wish to be able, to tell you that we're doing, such a great job that every single, engineer in the teams and in the organization, can, tell. We're trying, right? And it comes by having, again, as I said, aligning, from the top, right? What is, the company, vision, strategy? What are the company goals? How those goals are being tried to do a good job together, with, the rest of our product and extending leadership group on how do we cascade this to each of the team, under us, right? What does it mean? And engaging, their product leadership and engineering leadership typically. So the EM and the PM and sometimes, other, people at each of the level to, set their own objectives, right? To report on it on a regular basis and be very transparent with, their team and engage, their team with that, right? So for me, it's not just top down, right? It needs to be bottom up as well, because that, is what is the most powerful. Sometimes we do a good job at it. Sometimes, we can, maybe be a little bit more clear when we communicate, because I still have, engineers sometimes say, yeah, I still don't understand, right? So it's like, okay, let me see if I can, clarify those things. But I think that open communication is, I think, really, key. Being able to be challenged, right? And feel that it is really good to be challenged is as well, something key. Because at the end of the day, your leaders, they have, a perspective. They have access to maybe, more information. They also have maybe, different experience. but it's super important as well, that even, like at the team level, that, for them to understand how do they contribute. And then if they find a better way, right, then they should be able, to, do that, right? They should be able to raise it. They should be able, to, bring it. One of the things that I like doing is setting up, a framework with OKR, right? With objective and key results that are more focusing on the outcome and the impact rather than on the how, which project is going, to do that, right? Because if I tell them, hey, please execute, project A, B, and C, sure, people will execute, project A, B, and C, but I think, the intent is again, to go back to what is our objective, right? What is the, impact that we're trying, to set. So being clear on, setting up OKRs, but still giving the opportunity for the teams to decide what is the best way for them to really, support that, is usually the best way, right? Because that allows us as well to be agile. That allows us to as well, embrace, our own learnings, and make sure that, we still, meet on what are our objectives and our key results.
I love it. It's a complete paradigm shift, basically, just as you said, bottom up,
Yeah.
not only top down.
Yeah.
Apart from the OKRs, do you use any other metrics? That's a very controversial topic in engineering. Do you have anything in place? What's your take on that?
So I can share two experiences, right? One is at Mollie, for developer experience is not necessarily super mature, that we have a lot of very, strong KPIs or, like key performance indicators that are looking at, the velocity. Like we have, a couple of things, but are mostly looking at it from what are the improvements areas we need to do when it comes to developer enablement, right? How do we make, launching a new service, from scratch, faster, right? So we're trying, to have to improve, that time. Same thing, for, merge, deployment, pipelines, those kind of things. But we are using it mostly to drive the improvements we need to drive, for helping the entire engineering community. I know it's quite, hype at the moment. For the last 6 months, a lot of companies are looking at, really, detailed data. And I'm going to share the experience that I had at Uber, because of course, Uber being a much more mature company with a lot of platform developer enablement, teams, then they were definitely, way more data points to be able, as a manager, when I was, in that role, at Uber, for me to understand, okay, what's, the velocity of a team, not so much of an individual, but like it's more coming towards like, we aim at building a high performing team, right? Then how do we measure if a team is high performing or not? So, and there are various aspects, but for me, and again, it's my personal opinion, right? I always think that whatever data point you're looking at, when it comes to, number of lines of code, or when it comes to like, number of commits, if you know the rule of the game, you can play the system, right? So I'm not necessarily, I don't like looking at this. It can be indicators, right? Sometimes it's good for me to, like, it's important as a manager. I remember when I was managing first line, like understand if one of my engineers did not do any commits at all for a week. It's like, okay, what's going on? Is there a problem, right? And it is more, as a way to trigger that conversation than necessarily as a way of, saying, oh, you're, doing, a bad job or not, right? But yes, those are, indicators. And I think that's why you have to rely on the engineering manager that know the team, that know the individuals, that know as well, like the complexity of the project and what they're doing, to necessarily look at, okay, what does it mean, for me, to have, that high performing team, right? Again, I don't think that there is very, simple answer. I think it would be great if we could. And I think certain companies that are maybe more streamlined and are maybe more focusing on execution, it's easier, right? Because then you measure, time for, closing your user story or your task, number of tasks, done, number of, lines of code that was, added, in a week. But I think it's only, painting, a partial picture. Again, that's my personal, opinion. I know that there's value. And again, I think it is important, for managers to be aware, but it is important for them, to really, look at what do they want to do with that data and not just, trust it at, like just, their value.
Yeah, as you said, it's a partial picture because we mentioned technical debt and creating a better developer experience, more maintainable code. Lines of code would basically paint a wrong picture about this because
exactly, right? In that case, improvement would be how many lines of code do you remove, or how many, tests do you add, or how many like this. And that's why I think it is important to add the context. But again, being able, to measure and being able to have access to that information is, important because that gives you part of that picture, but the interpretation of the picture is important. And that's why I think for me, the role of the manager, is really to understand that and not just, to blindly, apply, certain principles. But luckily for me, in none of my experience, and maybe, that's because I also have the opportunity to be a leader and then make sure that, we implement things in a way that I really, strongly believe in. I've never seen this being, abused, right? But there are interesting, statistics, right? Again, I shared the example. If I have, engineers that did not, code for a week or a month, and it's like, okay, what's going on? Are they doing something else? Are they, producing a document, right? Maybe, some ADRs, or are they working on something different? Or is there, maybe a problem that we need to tackle early on, so we're not waiting, for like a formal performance review, which, I think would be, way too late.
Right. That's great. It was a very intense, insightful conversation. How do you want to wrap it up? Do you have any final words, any specific advice you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of topic. It's obviously something, as you can see, I'm very passionate about, and I can probably talk, for many, many hours. To me, it's important, like there's no right or wrong. It is about, making sure that we're making conscious choices in helping, growing, understanding the consequences, doing this, with, both, focus on, people and individuals, right? I always hated when in my career as an engineer, I always built on, oh, you're just a resource. It's like, no, I'm not a resource. I'm a person, right? So it is, I think it is something that's also one of the reasons why I became a manager first and then, a leader, next. But yeah, approaching, this with curiosity and, really, focusing on learning from others and sharing your own knowledge. I think that's also why for me, it's quite, interesting to be part of those conversations. So thank you again, for having me. It was lovely, talking to you. I hope that it was useful and that there was, some some insights that you and maybe other people can get out of it. So yeah, as always, just having just a conversation and talking to other people is always super nice in growing yourself.
That's amazing. It was definitely a very insightful conversation, a lot of learnings for myself and I'm sure for others who will listen to this. So thank you again. And it was a great pleasure to host you.
Thanks.